Victoria rubbed her tired eyes as she helped her 8-year-old son Kevin button up his worn jacket in their cramped apartment. The afternoon sun filtered through their small window, casting long shadows across the modest living room. This Thanksgiving, they were heading to David's grandmother's house for the first time since the divorce. "Mom, do you think Great-Grandma Beatrice will like me?" Kevin's voice trembled with nervous anticipation. The boy's dark eyes searched his mom's face for reassurance as he clutched a small handmade card he'd prepared. His clothes were clean but clearly hand-me-downs, a stark contrast to what he knew awaited him at the Chen family estate. "Just be yourself, sweetheart. That's all anyone can ask for." Victoria forced a smile, though her stomach churned with dread. She could already picture Beatrice's disapproving gaze, the way her lips would purse at Kevin's secondhand clothes and shy demeanor. The drive to Beacon Hill always felt like crossing into another world, one where her son's gentle nature was seen as weakness rather than kindness. "Will I get to play with Adrian?" Kevin asked, referring to his 9-year-old cousin. Victoria's heart clenched knowing how these visits usually went. "Adrian might be busy with his studies, honey. You know how seriously his family takes education." The truth was more painful. Adrian attended an elite private academy and was already being groomed for medical school, while Kevin struggled with basic math at his underfunded public school. Victoria's night shifts at the nursing home left her exhausted, barely able to help with homework, let alone provide the educational advantages that David's family took for granted. "Mom, do you think Great-Grandma will give me something to help with school?" Kevin's innocent question pierced her heart. He'd been asking for a tablet to help with his studies, knowing other kids had them, but Victoria's paycheck barely covered rent and groceries. "We'll see what happens, baby. Sometimes the best gifts aren't the ones we expect." As they gathered Kevin's backpack and the modest store-bought pie she brought as her contribution, Victoria steeled herself for another afternoon of subtle humiliations and watching her son's spirit slowly deflate under Beatrice Chen's critical gaze. During a recent phone call with Beatrice, she had mentioned, "I've arranged something very educational for Adrian. Natalie and I have been planning it for weeks." When Victoria heard this, a knot of dread formed in her stomach. Beatrice continued, "Of course, I haven't forgotten about Kevin either," but her voice carried the dismissive tone Victoria knew too well. As their old Honda pulled through the iron gates of the Chen family estate, Victoria's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The sprawling mansion before them spoke of generations of medical prestige and accumulated wealth. Marble columns flanked the entrance, and perfectly manicured gardens stretched as far as the eye could see. "Wow, it's like a palace," Kevin whispered, pressing his face against the window. His breath fogged the glass as he stared at the fountain in the circular driveway and the luxury cars parked in perfect rows. Victoria's beat-up Honda looked pitiful among the gleaming BMWs and Mercedes. "Remember what we talked about, honey. Just be polite and respectful," Victoria said, though her own voice betrayed her nervousness. She smoothed down Kevin's hair and checked his shirt one more time, knowing it wouldn't matter. As they approached the massive front door, it swung open to reveal Beatrice Chen in all her intimidating glory. At 72, she commanded respect with her silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and her tailored wool dress that probably cost more than Victoria's monthly salary. The numerous medical awards and honorary degrees lining the entrance hall behind her seemed to glare down at them. "Victoria and Kevin, punctual as always," Beatrice said, her tone suggesting this was somehow disappointing. She offered Victoria a brief, cold handshake and barely glanced at Kevin. "Hello, Beatrice," Victoria replied, instinctively straightening her shoulders despite feeling utterly out of place. She had brought Kevin here hoping against hope that family meant something, but the sterile atmosphere already told her otherwise. "Natalie and Harrison are in the library with Adrian. He's been showing off his latest academic achievements," Beatrice said with unmistakable pride. "Adrian is already studying pre-calculus, you know. Quite remarkable for a 9-year-old. Victoria felt Kevin shrink beside her at the mention of advanced mathematics, knowing her son still struggled with basic multiplication. "That's impressive," Victoria managed, placing a protective hand on Kevin's shoulder. "Kevin has been working very hard in his art class. His teacher says he has real talent." "Art." Beatrice repeated the word as if it left a bad taste in her mouth. "How creative. Well, come along. We mustn't keep the others waiting. As they followed Beatrice through the opulent hallway lined with family portraits of distinguished doctors and medical pioneers, Victoria wondered how she would survive the next few hours watching her son's confidence slowly crumble. The Chen family's formal dining room was a monument to medical achievement and old-money sophistication. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over polished mahogany furniture, while oil paintings of distinguished Chen family physicians gazed down from gilded frames. The dining table, which could easily seat 12, was set with bone china that probably cost more than Victoria's monthly rent. In the corner stood a towering display case filled with Adrian's academic trophies, spelling bee ribbons, and certificates from various gifted programs. Kevin's eyes widened as he took in the overwhelming display of success. "Look at all those awards," he whispered to his mom, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and inadequacy. Before Victoria could respond, Beatrice swept into the room and placed a firm hand on Kevin's shoulder. "Those belong to Adrian. He's been collecting them since kindergarten," she said matter-of-factly. "Most of those are for Adrian. His tutors and music instructors sent gifts to celebrate his academic achievements," Beatrice continued, gesturing toward an impressive display of wrapped packages. "But there might be something educational for you as well, Kevin." Kevin's hopeful expression dimmed slightly, but he tried to hide his disappointment. Victoria knelt beside her son and whispered softly, "Remember, the best gifts aren't always the biggest ones." The Thanksgiving spread was elaborate beyond belief: herb-crusted turkey, truffle stuffing, and gourmet sides that looked like they belonged in a five-star restaurant. Everything screamed expensive taste and effortless abundance. "Please, everyone take your places," Beatrice announced with the authority of a hospital administrator. "Adrian, you sit here beside great-grandmother so we can discuss your recent achievements." Once seated, Harrison began opening an expensive bottle of wine with practiced ease. He poured Victoria's glass with a patronizing smile and said, "It must be exhausting working those night shifts. Are you getting adequate rest to properly supervise Kevin's homework?" Victoria kept her expression neutral despite the condescending tone. "We have a good routine. Kevin is very responsible about his studies." "Responsibility is one thing," Natalie interjected smoothly. "But children need structure and academic guidance. Adrian has tutors for math, science, and Mandarin. What additional support does Kevin receive?" The question hung in the air like a challenge Victoria couldn't meet. "Kevin is doing well in his regular classes," she said defensively, watching her son push food around his plate. She tried to redirect the conversation. "This turkey is absolutely delicious, Beatrice. You've outdone yourself." But Beatrice wasn't finished. "Kevin, I spoke with your dad last week. He mentioned you're struggling with basic arithmetic," she said, her voice carrying the clinical detachment of a physician delivering bad news. Kevin looked up with startled, hurt eyes. Victoria felt her heart racing with anger. "That's being addressed," she said firmly. "Kevin works very hard, and his teacher says he's making progress." "Progress isn't enough," Beatrice replied coldly. Adrian was already doing advanced multiplication at Kevin's age. The Chen family has always valued academic excellence. "Well, Adrian has always been exceptional," Natalie added with barely concealed smugness. "His IQ test results put him in the top 1 percentile. The prep school counselor says he's Harvard material already." "Oh, really?" Harrison said with mock surprise. "I heard there was some incident with Adrian's attitude toward his classmates recently." "Harrison." Natalie shot her husband a warning look. "I'm just teasing," Harrison chuckled. "Adrian is our little genius. He excels at everything he touches." Throughout the remainder of the meal, the conversation centered exclusively on Adrian's accelerated learning program, his violin recitals, and his early admission to a summer medical camp. Victoria ate mechanically, her appetite gone, while Kevin sat in increasingly painful silence. Every achievement mentioned felt like another weight pressing down on her son's small shoulders. As the dinner plates were being cleared, Beatrice leaned close to Victoria and spoke in the measured tone she once used to deliver difficult diagnoses. "I'm deeply concerned about Kevin's academic trajectory. Single parenthood is challenging enough without proper educational guidance," she said, her words cutting like a scalpel. Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she folded her napkin, but she kept her voice steady. Kevin is a bright boy, Beatrice. He just learns differently than some children. Differently? Beatrice's eyebrows arched with skeptical disdain. In the medical field, we call that making excuses for poor performance. The Chen family has always demanded excellence. Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks but forced herself to remain composed. He's only 8 years old. He has time to grow. Time is a luxury we can't afford, Beatrice replied coldly. By the way, I've prepared something very educational for Kevin today. I think it will open his eyes to what real achievement looks like. Those words sent ice through Victoria's veins. There was something calculated and cruel in the way Beatrice emphasized educational. But surrounded by the family's wealth and status, Victoria felt powerless to challenge her. She simply nodded and said, "That's very thoughtful of you." When the elaborate pumpkin pie was served, Adrian bounced in his chair with excitement. "Great-grandma, can we do the surprise now? I want to show Kevin my new stuff." "Patience, Adrian," Natalie said with an indulgent smile. "Good things come to those who wait. There's a very special presentation planned." Kevin looked up at his mom with hopeful eyes. "Will I get something to help with school, Mom?" Victoria's heart ached as she smoothed his hair. "We'll see what happens, sweetheart. Sometimes the best lessons come in unexpected ways. Time for our educational presentations," Beatrice announced, her voice carrying the authority of a medical lecture. The family moved to the library, where built-in bookshelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with medical journals and leather-bound classics. 2 wrapped packages sat on the mahogany desk, one significantly larger and more elegantly wrapped than the other. Kevin's eyes lit up with nervous anticipation. For weeks, he'd been hoping for a tablet to help with his homework, something to level the playing field with his classmates who had access to educational technology. He'd seen other kids using them for math games and reading programs that made learning fun. First, for Adrian, Beatrice announced with obvious pride, lifting the larger package. A gift befitting a future physician. Adrian tore through the wrapping with practiced enthusiasm, revealing a pristine iPad Pro with an Apple Pencil and a collection of advanced educational apps. "Wow! Look at this, Kevin!" Adrian exclaimed, immediately powering on the device. "It has anatomy programs, chemistry simulations, and even virtual dissection software." Natalie and Harrison beamed with satisfaction. "Adrian will use this for his advanced placement courses," Natalie explained. "He's already been accepted into a summer program for gifted students at Harvard Medical School." Kevin watched in fascination as the screen came alive with colorful, interactive learning tools. His cousin was already navigating through complex scientific diagrams with ease. "Now, for Kevin," Beatrice said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. She handed him a much smaller, simply wrapped package. "Something to help you understand the importance of serious study." Kevin carefully unwrapped the gift, his small hands working methodically through the tape. Inside was a battered, decades-old medical dictionary, its pages yellowed and binding cracked. A handwritten note was tucked inside that read, "Study hard like Adrian, and maybe someday you can be worthy of the Chen family name." The silence in the room was deafening. Kevin stared at the ancient book, his 8-year-old mind struggling to comprehend the difference between his gift and his cousin's cutting-edge technology. "Thank you, great-grandma," he whispered, though confusion clouded his innocent eyes. Beatrice smiled with cold satisfaction. "That dictionary belonged to your grandfather. Perhaps reading it will inspire you to take your education more seriously." Victoria felt her world tilt as she watched her son's face crumble with disappointment and humiliation. Kevin opened the old medical dictionary with trembling hands, flipping through pages of complex terminology that might as well have been written in a foreign language. The musty smell of aged paper filled his nostrils as he struggled to understand words like myocardial infarction and cerebrospinal fluid. Meanwhile, Adrian was already downloading advanced learning games on his new iPad Pro, the screen bright and colorful with interactive animations. "Great-grandma," Kevin said quietly, his voice barely audible, "I don't understand these words. They're too hard." Beatrice's smile turned sharp and condescending. "That's exactly the point, Kevin. While Adrian is already preparing for his medical future, you're still struggling with basic arithmetic. She gestured toward his cousin, who was now showing off a virtual heart dissection program. Look at Adrian. At 9, he's already discussing cellular biology with his tutors. Do you see the difference? Kevin's lower lip began to quiver as he stared at the incomprehensible text. The contrast between the ancient, yellowed pages in his hands and the sleek technology in Adrian's was stark and humiliating. I tried really hard in school this month, Kevin whispered, his voice breaking. My teacher said I'm getting better at reading. Reading picture books doesn't count, Beatrice said with cruel dismissiveness. The Chen family has produced doctors, surgeons, and medical researchers for 3 generations. We don't have time for mediocrity. Natalie and Harrison exchanged knowing glances, barely suppressing their amusement. Maybe Kevin just needs to apply himself more seriously, Natalie said with false sympathy. Adrian was already reading medical journals for fun at Kevin's age. Tears began streaming down Kevin's face as he clutched the dictionary to his chest. His 8-year-old mind couldn't process why his family would be so deliberately cruel. Adrian looked up from his iPad, momentarily confused by the tension in the room. Don't cry, Kevin, he said with the casual cruelty of childhood. Great-grandma just wants you to be smart like me. That's right, Beatrice said coldly. Tears won't improve your grades. This is motivation. Use it wisely. Victoria watched her son's spirit break before her eyes, his small frame shaking with silent sobs. The rage building inside her was unlike anything she'd ever felt, a mother's fury at seeing her child deliberately destroyed. I want to go home, Kevin whispered, his voice barely audible. Please, Mom. I want to go home. Victoria stood up slowly, her hands clenched into fists. Okay, sweetheart. We're leaving right now. She helped Kevin to his feet, watching as he clutched the dictionary like a symbol of his own inadequacy. Wait here for just one moment, she told her son, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Victoria walked to her purse and pulled out a manila envelope she'd been carrying. Inside was a carefully prepared report documenting Beatrice's pattern of psychological abuse toward children, complete with witness statements and professional assessments. As the former head of pediatrics, Beatrice would understand exactly what this meant for her reputation and legacy. Victoria had hoped she'd never need to use it, but watching her son's humiliation had made the decision clear. With steady hands, she returned to the library where the family sat in satisfied silence. Upon entering the library, Beatrice, Natalie, and Harrison were casually discussing Adrian's upcoming academic achievements. Adrian sat cross-legged on the Persian rug, absorbed in his new educational apps, completely oblivious to the devastation he'd just witnessed. Everyone pretended not to notice Victoria's return, their comfortable cruelty resuming as if nothing had happened. Victoria stood directly in front of Beatrice and quietly placed the manila envelope on the mahogany desk. Happy Thanksgiving, Beatrice, she said in a voice that was eerily calm. Her smile was pleasant, but her eyes held the focused intensity of someone who had reached their breaking point. Beatrice glanced at the envelope with mild curiosity. What's this? Another one of your little crafts projects? She asked dismissively. Victoria didn't respond. She simply stood there, watching as Beatrice opened the envelope with the same clinical precision she once used to review patient files. Beatrice pulled out the documents and began reading, her expression shifting from amusement to confusion to horror. The papers contained a formal complaint to the Massachusetts Medical Board detailing her pattern of psychological abuse toward children, complete with witness statements and professional psychological assessments. A cover letter in Victoria's careful read, it seems professional ethics don't apply to retired doctors who torture children either. The color drained from Beatrice's face as she realized the implications. Her hands shook as she flipped through documented instances of her cruelty, each one meticulously recorded and corroborated. What is this? She whispered, her voice hollow with shock. This is character assassination. The room fell silent except for the sound of Adrian's tablet games. Natalie and Harrison leaned forward, trying to see what had caused such a dramatic change in Beatrice's demeanor. It's not character assassination when it's the truth, Victoria said quietly. Her voice carried the steady authority of someone who had spent years documenting neglect and abuse in her work. You just psychologically tortured an 8-year-old child for your own entertainment. Beatrice clutched the papers to her chest, her medical training warring with her panic. You wouldn't dare file this. Do you have any idea what this could do to my reputation? The same thing you just did to my son's self-worth, Victoria replied without flinching. He's 8 years old, Beatrice. A respected pediatrician should understand child development better than anyone. It was meant to motivate him, Beatrice said, her voice rising defensively. The boy needs to understand the standards expected of this family. Standards? Victoria's composure finally cracked, revealing the fury underneath. You call deliberate humiliation a standard? You gave him a medical textbook he can't read while his cousin got cutting-edge technology. That wasn't education. That was sadism. Natalie jumped to her feet. Victoria, you're being completely unreasonable. Beatrice has devoted her life to helping children. Helping children? Victoria turned her cold gaze to Natalie. You sat there and watched an 8-year-old cry while you all laughed. What kind of lawyer are you that you can't recognize emotional abuse? Beatrice waved the complaint with trembling hands. This is extortion. You're trying to destroy a lifetime of medical service over a simple lesson. Simple lesson? Victoria's voice was ice. I work with elderly patients every day, Beatrice. I know exactly what respect and dignity look like, and what you did to Kevin was neither. Harrison stood up, trying to defuse the situation. Let's all take a breath here. This is a family dinner, not a courtroom. But Beatrice's medical arrogance had fully emerged. Get out, she shrieked, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. Get out of my house. Ungrateful woman. Gladly, Victoria said with quiet dignity. Kevin, we're going home. Kevin emerged from the bathroom where he'd been hiding, his eyes puffy and red from crying. Victoria knelt down and helped him into his worn winter jacket, her hands gentle despite the rage still burning in her chest. Mom, Kevin whispered, his voice hoarse from tears, I don't want to come here anymore. Victoria pulled her son close, feeling his small body tremble against hers. I know, baby. We don't have to. We'll make our own traditions from now on. As they walked toward the massive front door, Beatrice's voice echoed through the marble hallway behind them. Kevin will never amount to anything with your permissive parenting. That boy needs discipline, not coddling. Victoria didn't turn around. She opened the heavy door and guided her son into the cold November evening, the contrast between the mansion's warmth and the outside chill matching the emotional shift they both felt. In their old Honda, Kevin pressed his face against the window and watched the city lights blur past. Am I stupid, Mom? He asked quietly, his breath fogging the glass. Is that why I can't be smart like Adrian? Victoria pulled into a nearby parking lot and turned to face her son fully. Kevin, look at me, she said, gently lifting his chin. You are brilliant in your own way. What happened in there wasn't about being smart. It was about mean people being cruel. But the dictionary was so hard, Kevin said, fresh tears threatening. Adrian understood everything on his iPad. Victoria smiled despite her own pain. You know what? Tonight we're going to celebrate what makes you special. And I have a surprise waiting at home. Kevin's eyes showed a flicker of cautious hope, though he was clearly afraid to believe it. When they pulled into their apartment complex, David's luxury sedan was parked in the visitor's spot. He stood leaning against the car, his expensive coat a stark contrast to the modest surroundings. Dad. Kevin ran to his father, who caught him in a fierce hug. Hey, kiddo. How was dinner? David asked, though Victoria's expression told him everything he needed to know. Victoria approached with tired eyes. Your grandmother showed her true colors tonight. David's jaw tightened as he understood the implication. The three of them climbed the stairs to Victoria's small apartment. Inside, the living room had been transformed with warm string lights and a modest but cheerful Thanksgiving display. On the coffee table sat a wrapped package that made Kevin's eyes widen. What's that? Kevin asked cautiously, still wounded from the evening's cruelty. David smiled at his son. Something from your mom and me. We wanted to make sure you had something that was really yours. Kevin approached the package hesitantly. It's not going to be empty, is it? Open it and see, Victoria encouraged gently. Kevin carefully unwrapped the gift, revealing a brand new tablet designed specifically for kids, loaded with educational games and art programs. It's really mine? Kevin breathed, his face lighting up for the first time all evening. All yours, David confirmed, ruffling his son's hair. Your mom worked extra shifts to save up for it, and I helped with the apps. Kevin threw his arms around both parents. Thank you. This is so much better than that scary book. Victoria laughed, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. As David showed Kevin how to use the drawing program, Victoria made hot tea in her tiny kitchen. The apartment was small and humble, but it was filled with something the Chen mansion had never had, genuine love. I don't want to see great-grandma anymore, Kevin said suddenly. She was mean to me. Victoria sat beside him on their second-hand couch. You don't have to, sweetheart. Family isn't just about blood, it's about people who treat you with kindness. Will Dad's new wife be nice to me? Kevin asked innocently. Jennifer loves you already, David assured him. She's excited to meet you properly next weekend. I love you both so much, Kevin said, snuggling between his parents. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from Natalie, but she turned it face down without reading it. Tonight was about her small, imperfect, but loving family. Her relationship with the Chens might be over, but she didn't regret protecting her son's heart and dignity. As the city lights twinkled beyond their small window, watching Kevin's genuine smile return, Victoria understood what real wealth looked like. It wasn't marble floors or medical degrees, it was the unconditional love that filled their modest home. On a warm day in November when autumn leaves were falling gently on Boston's streets, Victoria's phone rang during her lunch break at the nursing home. She glanced at the caller ID and froze. It was a number she hadn't seen in almost a year, Beatrice Chen. Since that devastating Thanksgiving, there had been complete silence from the Chen family. Hello, Victoria answered cautiously, her voice guarded. Hi, Victoria, Beatrice's voice sounded different, smaller, more uncertain than the commanding tone Victoria remembered. I was wondering if we could talk. Victoria was stunned. The woman who had once wielded her medical credentials like a weapon now sounded almost fragile. What about, Beatrice? I'd like to meet with you and Kevin, if you're willing, Beatrice said quietly. I have some things I need to say. Victoria's first instinct was to refuse, but something in Beatrice's voice gave her pause. Kevin still has nightmares sometimes about that day, Victoria said firmly. I understand, Beatrice replied, her voice heavy with what sounded like genuine remorse. I've had time to think about my actions. Too much time. They agreed to meet at a neutral location, a small cafe near Boston Common. The next day, Victoria arrived with Kevin, who clung to her hand nervously. Beatrice was already seated at a corner table, and Victoria was shocked by her appearance. The imperious woman who had once dominated every room now looked smaller, older, wearing a simple sweater instead of her usual expensive attire. Hello, Kevin, Beatrice said softly, her voice gentle in a way Victoria had never heard before. Thank you both for coming. Kevin nodded silently but didn't let go of his mom's hand. Victoria sat across from Beatrice, maintaining protective proximity to her son. I need to apologize, Beatrice began, looking directly at Kevin. What I did to you last Thanksgiving was wrong. Completely wrong. I hurt you, and I'm sorry. Kevin studied his great-grandmother's face, processing this unexpected vulnerability. I've been seeing a counselor, Beatrice continued, addressing Victoria. She helped me understand that my behavior was abusive. I used my position to hurt a child, and there's no excuse for that. Victoria felt her defenses slowly lowering as she recognized genuine remorse. What changed? She asked quietly. Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. I realized I was destroying the only real family I had left. Natalie barely speaks to me anymore, and Adrian, well, he's so focused on achievements that he's forgotten how to just be a child. She turned to Kevin again. How are you doing in school, sweetheart? Kevin glanced at his mother, then spoke quietly. Better. I'm getting A's in art, and my reading is improving. That's wonderful, Beatrice said, and for the first time, her praise sounded genuine. Your mom tells me you're very talented. As they talked, Victoria watched her son gradually relax. The conversation remained careful, but it was the first time Kevin had ever experienced his great-grandmother's approval without conditions. When they prepared to leave, Beatrice touched Victoria's arm gently. Would it be possible to see you both again? I'd like to try to be the grandmother Kevin deserves. Victoria looked at her son, who nodded cautiously. We can try, she said. But things will be different this time. I understand, Beatrice replied. I have a lot to make up for. Over the following months, Victoria allowed carefully supervised visits between Beatrice and Kevin. The change in Beatrice was remarkable. She learned to celebrate Kevin's artistic talents instead of demanding academic perfection. She even helped him set up a small art station in her library, replacing some of her medical journals with Kevin's drawings. Meanwhile, the relationship with Natalie's family remained strained. Natalie had been furious about Beatrice's capitulation to Victoria, feeling that her own family's achievements were no longer properly valued. Adrian, now 10, had become increasingly anxious and perfectionist, struggling under the pressure that had once been Kevin's burden. As seasons changed from winter to spring, Victoria learned something profound about forgiveness and growth. Family wasn't about blood or status, it was about the willingness to change, to admit mistakes, and to love unconditionally. Watching Kevin laugh with his great-grandmother over one of his drawings, Victoria finally understood that healing was possible, even after the deepest wounds.